Good morning, Caitlin. Welcome to Around the
Morning.
Campfire. We are today talking about people with problems with their website. And let me just set the framework here for how people come to us. They often say there is something wrong with their website. Sometimes they're specific, sometimes they have misdiagnosed it, but they will say it's not performing as well as it could. It might be management is complaining. It might be they don't like the design, or somebody has told them the design is looking dated, or it's not performing. It's not converting. And so we will get a list of complaints. These are the problems that people have or perceive to have. And one of the things they want to know is there a problem? Is there something wrong? So I guess where should they start if they think that their website isn't helping their cause? It's not doing what they hope it would with business goals, business conversions, and they don't know what's wrong or even where to start. Well, how do they start diagnosing these problems?
Yeah, I we get that a lot, and I feel like the biggest problem that will come out of this is I'll often ask, okay, well, what proof do you have? What have you seen? Have you seen a drop in page views? Have you seen a drop in conversions on forums? Like, where's the data? And usually there isn't any is sort of the biggest problem.
They're
Typically
lacking
it's,
data.
oh, yeah, someone feels this way, or oh, it just something feels wrong, or it tends to be all intuition based, or maybe focus on design versus actually performance. And so where I always tell people to start is let's get some data
Yeah.
and let's make sure that we can see what's working, what isn't working. So we don't spend time that you don't spend your time and energy and effort fixing something that really isn't broken and really figuring out what's actually broken at the end of it.
So there
So
is a problem. We got to start with let's get some proof that there is a problem or measure it. Yep.
or find out what the problem even is. Oftentimes what'll happen is someone will come to us with, hey, I think that this page is the problem. And really that page is fine, but it's something else in the site that's the problem.
Sure. Sure.
So let's get some data. So low hanging fruit wise, Google
Yep.
Analytics. If you don't have Google Analytics set up on your site, it's a massively missed opportunity. It's completely free and lets you
Completely free.
see,
Keyword.
yeah, completely free. It lets you see what pages people are going to, how they're interacting on those pages. Just good base level data. Another free tool is any sort of heat mapping tool. We tend to recommend Microsoft Clarity. And what that lets you see is like hot and cold zones of where people are clicking on pages, how far down the page they're scrolling, stuff like
Yeah.
that.
I've seen
So,
those heat maps. They have little red for places where people are slowing down and looking more and or moving their mouse, and then
yeah,
blue where there's no eyeballs are going. Is that's
yeah,
a heat
it's
map?
hot and cold. Yep.
Okay.
So,
And
hot
is
means
Microsoft Clarity
lots.
a free tool also?
Microsoft Clarity is free.
Okay.
There are other paid ones that have other bells and whistles, but if you're getting started, honestly, we recommend Microsoft Clarity most of the time because it's just a good base level tool. We use it a lot, even on our projects.
Put
But
that on any site? Does that work for no matter what I've got? Is it the WordPress or if I've got Sitecore, can I use those? Titan?
vast majority. There's every once in a while technical limitations, especially if the site's older or if it isn't on a mainstream CMS, if it's sort of a custom build site.
Homemade.
Every once in a while, it won't work as anticipated,
Okay.
but I would say 90% of the time, we don't have any issues with it. Same thing with
And that
Google Analytics.
Okay, and that will reveal on any one given page where the eyeballs are going.
Yeah. And it tracks the whole site. So it's all based on traffic. So for both of these, you're obviously going to have more insight if your site has a lot more traffic. But
Yeah.
if your site doesn't have a lot of traffic, it just takes time.
What's a pattern that you see that indicates there's a problem?
So there could be a couple different things. A big thing that we'll look for is where they're focusing their time on the page. So, for example, a very common problem we'll see is people will put their big content, the big thing they want someone to get out of that page, halfway down the page or so. And something that we look for is how far down the page is someone scrolling. So, if they're scrolling and say 75% of the time they're leaving before they get to that really important content, well, then that really important content isn't doing what you want it to do.
Right,
So let's
sure.
move it higher on the page. Let's shuffle things around. Another thing we'll look for is on things that are either in line with what we want them to click on or not in line. So do we see lots of clicks on the calls to action buttons, or do we see clicks on, images that aren't actually clickable, that someone's getting frustrated because it's not working the way they think it will, or
Sure.
design elements that aren't interacting the way that they expect them to. Also a sign that we maybe need to move some things around, change some things up to better suit that user experience.
Can you do these heat maps in conjunction with A/B testing? What is A/B testing?
A/B testing is either usually it's offered by a third-party tool that you can put two different versions of a page up
Yeah,
and see which one performs better.
sure.
Um, Typically those tools will have their own form of tracking that. So
Gotcha.
sometimes they'll have heat maps built in and things like that. A tool like Microsoft Clarity, if it's all URL based. So if it's the same URL, it'll be able to do that. If it's two different URLs, it won't. It really depends
Gotcha.
on how that tool works.
We glanced over Google Analytics. I assume most people know what that is, but just at a very high level, what is Google Analytics? Let's spend a minute there.
Yeah, it's sort of your dashboard of how your site's performing, is how I like to think of it. So it'll tell you what pages people are going to, how long they're spending on those pages, to a point, how they're navigating through the site, how pages are loading, what devices they're using, really just the base level data of how people are interacting with your website. And it gets really powerful when you combine it with something like a heat map,
Yes.
because where Google Analytics falters is it can tell you that someone, spent a minute and a half on the page, but not what they did when they're on that page all the time without additional tracking and work into it to make it do that. So with a heat map, you can then go to that page and say, oh, we know people spend about this long on the page. Here's where they're clicking. Here's how they're scrolling. Here's what's working, what's not.
Okay. So diagnostics tools, we've got Google Analytics
Mhm.
for getting baseline data conjunction with a heat map study. What other things do you have in your tool bag that you use?
Yeah. So if you're just getting started, start with those two. The next step would be Google Tag Manager. Again, this requires a bit more knowledge or bringing in a third party to help you with this. But what Google Tag Manager lets you do is really customize your Google Analytics and what you're tracking. So it can let you set up things like, if there's a form that's really important on your website and you want to know how many people are filling out that form. Google
Mm.
Analytics might not be able to do that natively, but with Google Tag Manager on top of it, you can set up more specific tracking. So it's really great when you're trying to see, specific conversions and things that are specific to you, getting that data and understanding what's happening there.
With the
Um,
tag manager, if I understand it, you can assign well, there's a bunch of stuff you can do with it, but one of the things
yeah.
you can assign to all the individual elements that you might click on a page. If you have three links to
hmm
going to three different places in the site, you can say which which one is generating traffic. Where natively Google Analytics wouldn't necessarily have that data.
Not
This
always.
you can add extra tags, extra pieces onto that page that send signals to Tag Manager to track that
Correct.
information better. Yeah,
Correct. Basically, if you have Google Analytics set up and you're like not able to find an answer to something that you want to know, there's probably something you can do in Tag Manager to get that data that'll
yeah,
answer that question for you.
yeah. You see it often on the URLs, I mean, emails that you get. There's a UTM tag and
Yeah.
others. And I see that. What is that? I know there's many things that come on those links, but what is UTM? What kind of thing is that indicating? Why did
Basically
they
what
put that
that
in emails?
Yeah, basically what that's doing is it's tracking the performance of that particular link and someone going to your website from that link. So you'll see
Got
it
it.
a lot, like you said, in emails.
Yeah.
So say you've got links in your email that go to certain pages on your site, and you want to see how many people go from that exact link in your email to that page on your site. And then you would filter additional things that they do once they get to your website. So understanding, what other pages they look at, how long they spend on the site in general if they come from that email. So it's just a way of better understanding those additional marketing tools or additional marketing elements that you might be doing, how they impact your site traffic and how valuable they are and what type of traffic they're holding on your site.
So if I'm following you, you're saying that the key is you got to start collecting data and lots of it, and then hopefully over time you can see that you have a drop off in traffic, or that a page isn't performing, or that a link that you hoped people were clicking on isn't being clicked on, and then you can validate. Yes, in fact, I can quantify that there's a problem because we can see it, and or run A/B test experiments to see if we change this, did we get more better traffic? So
Yeah, I think it's sort of we've talked around the other half of this. So obviously we need to get the data, but
yeah.
the other half of this is we need to understand what data to get. So we've talked around like understanding what links are being clicked or if a form you need, but taking a bit of time to identify these are the things that are the most important for users to do on our website. We want them to click this link. We want them to visit this page. And making sure that you're going in with sort of the goals of your site and what you want users to be able to accomplish when you're looking at that data and when you're setting up that data. It's a good way to know because data can be very overwhelming. So it can be very much like, oh, I have all this information, but I don't know what to do with it. So
Sure.
going in with clear parameters of this is what I want users to be doing. Let's
Hmm.
see if we've got the data to support they either are or are not doing that on your
So
site.
you actually might winding all the way back to the beginning. You might want to start with what are the goals of your website and who are
Yeah.
your audiences? And so prior to the data collection stage, you'd want to be able to know, well, where are you going? What direction are you heading?
Yeah, I think sitting down and figuring that out and making sure that you have multiple perspectives in place. So I think it's really easy to just look at it from if you're marketing, a marketing perspective, if you're an IT perspective, but sticking down and thinking broadly, what are the goals of the site from everyone involved? And also making sure that you involve your leadership in that because
Mm,
they're going to have a slightly different take on that, a slightly different set of goals that they want the website to accomplish, most likely.
yeah.
So making sure that you have the data to understand what they want to accomplish so that you can answer their questions as well is really important.
So now you've got leadership involved and they're making a lot of noise. How do you know who's most important? How do you sort out who to listen to? How do you play group therapist here?
I always go back to the users. So I actually say all of our internal feelings on the website, all of the business feelings and the internal politics and everything that's going on, that's all secondary to the needs of your customers and the users of your website.
Mm,
Because if really they can't do things on their site, if they can't achieve what they need on your website, then they're not going to help you from a business perspective. They're going to leave your site, go to a competitor, reach out to sales. They're just going to get frustrated.
and so,
So you got to take a step back and you
yep.
got to put those users' needs first
Mm,
and then bring in the goals of everyone else internally. And I find that's a good way to also level set so that all the internal politics gets put to the side if we can say this is what's best for the users
yeah.
and we need to make sure that they can do what they need to do first of all.
Fair, fair. So, and finding out what the users want, what are the tricks and techniques for getting to users, other than watching
Yeah,
your data and collecting data and all the stuff we've talked about?
that's one half. So definitely one half, making sure you're keeping an eye on your data. The other half is talking to them. I
Mm,
think the data gives you a good sense of what they're doing on the site, what pages they're going to, but it gives you no why. Why are
mm,
they going to those pages? What are they doing when they're there from like a mental perspective? What are they trying to do? We
mm.
can get that to a point if we can see like where they're clicking and what they're doing, but we're missing a lot of that without actually talking to users. So there's a few different ways you can do that, whether it's actually sending out a survey and doing like a one-off like survey, focus group campaign, interviews. But another thing that's I think a missed opportunity is just having a little pop-up survey in different areas saying, how is your experience? What type of,
Mm,
what did you struggle with right now? Did you able to do what you wanted to do? Just a quick 2-question little pop-up survey
mm.
as a way to get that user input can help you to find those issues that you're with and keep an eye on that on an ongoing basis as well.
Have you had success with these pop-up surveys? I see them. I sometimes I answer them. Oftentimes I just close them. Well, how do you know if a pop-up survey is appropriate and if it's working? Or what's been your results? What have you seen from the results of pop-up surveys? What do you conclude?
They're the most effective over a long period of time. So, and typically when someone's going to fill it out, like you said, a lot of people will just close them, they'll just ignore them. But you have to keep in mind that the mindset of someone who's going to fill it out is either they've had a really good experience or a really negative experience.
Mm, yeah,
So it's a great way to identify big problems because someone who's getting really frustrated and they want to get that frustration out, they're going to fill
yeah,
out the pop up survey.
gotcha.
On the other side, someone who's had a really great experience is super happy with what they just got and is really excited. They also might fill out the pop-up survey.
Probably
So you
fewer of
miss that.
them.
Probably fewer, but they do exist. We have seen them show up.
Right.
So you're going to miss out on the middle ground. But where I think that they're really valuable is if you do have a really big user experience problem on your website, they're going to tell you about it.
Sure.
And so it's a nice way to make sure that you've got your bases covered, keep an eye on it, make sure that there's no major issues coming up so that you can address them if they do.
Yeah, I can relate to the fact of being deeply frustrated with a website and then even to the point of finding a contact us thing buried deep down there someplace and sending a flaming, I would have bought your product if not for your
Yeah.
incompetent website design and my deep frustration. So yes, we can relate. I think all of us can relate to the frustration you feel on some websites and so pop-up survey had that come up at that moment. Yeah. I don't know if they have how many thumbs down 19 times.
At least then they would know. I
Yep.
think the biggest issue with a lot of these things is not knowing. So
Right.
if you aren't keeping an eye on your data, if you aren't talking to users, you could have a major user experience problem on your website and not even know about it.
Yeah.
So I think that's where that value comes in is we can know that there's a problem so we can fix it.
Okay. So we've talked to the users. Do we have focus groups, pop-up surveys?
Yeah, focus groups can be a great tool as well. They're by far the most intensive thing you can do, basically where you
Mm,
get a group of, we say 6 to 8 on average people,
sure.
usually on a call like
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
and about their experience. It can be really valuable because you can really have good roundtable discussions about what's working, what's not working, those frustrations and those successes. But they're incredibly time intensive. They take a
Yeah.
lot of effort.
All
So
right.
it's something
What
to
else?
be done usually when you have like a major issue going on.
What else? What
So.
else instead of a focus group? What else might we do?
I think surveys are kind of the nice middle ground there. So sending out a survey via your email list, something like that, to just get opinions. It won't be as in depth as as a focus group, but
Yeah.
it's a good way to get some user opinion and see what's going on. I recommend doing them probably like maybe once a year. If you're sending out your normal customer surveys or at the end of like a sales process, just add in a couple website questions and see what comes out of it. I think is a good way to go.
What sort of response rate do you get when you send out a general survey if somebody's contemplating this? Is that you get 10%, 50%?
It really depends on how you use that list. If this is like a list that you don't usually communicate with people via, we're
Mm,
talking like a 5% response rate. It's pretty
okay.
low. If
Yep.
it's a list that you're regularly communicating with them, maybe it's like a newsletter or something else like that you're doing, you can usually
Sure.
see closer to 15 or 20%.
Okay.
And it also depends on how dedicated that customer base is. If you have a really dedicated customer base who are big fans of your product, big evangelicals of, sharing your product to others, you also will probably see a slightly higher response rate.
If you get a 5% response rate, is that valid and credible?
I think anything is valid and credible in that it gives you data. In a lot of cases here, we aren't looking for statistical significance because we aren't trying to make, big pronouncements about large groups of people where we have to worry about that. We're not doing market research. We're just trying to get some feedback from users
Yeah.
about how their experience is on your website.
Yeah.
So obviously, if your list is really big and you get 5% and that leads to a couple hundred people, I think that's great. But always keeping in mind that people who are going to fill this out are, again, probably on the either end of that spectrum of really unhappy or really happy. Every once in a while, you get someone in between and making sure that you go into it with that context to better understand what that you're getting actually means.
In theory, if you solved problems for the really unhappy people, assuming their problems are rational and reasonable,
Correct.
um,
Yeah.
that you would, by default, making a leap here, but that you could almost assume that you're not going to necessarily break something that's making the happy people happy, and so you're very likely going to solve a problem that's frustrating more than the people that are complaining. If one person complains, there's 15 of them that didn't, that just gave up and walked away. So yeah, I think is that a reasonable assumption?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I
All right.
think looking at, especially if you start to see patterns among common things people are being vocal about, there are probably others who are experiencing that too, just not being as vocal.
All right. So we've got a person comes to you, website's not up to snuff. My leadership is complaining. And then what would be you would say, is it the design? Is it the data? Is it the conversions? What are they unhappy about? What are some of the things that people are unhappy about or sense that's wrong? What are the baseline of the complaints?
Yeah, the most common complaint I think we've gotten recently is no one can find anything. So usually it's a navigational issue, which is one of the larger issues I
Yeah,
think we get.
sure.
Um, Also that no one's converting, so nobody's clicking on the buttons they want people to click on, no one's filling out their forms. Basically, the website isn't doing for them from a business perspective what they want it to be doing for them from a business
Yeah,
perspective.
sure.
And then probably the other most common one is outdated design. The site has been a few years since it's been updated, and either the branding is out of date, the content's out of date, the look and feel is just out of date, which can cause can cause pretty big issues from the both business perspective as well. I think the most telling of that is at one point I was doing a one-on-one interview with a customer of a client, and they said that when they first went to their website, they thought they were out of business because the website looked
Yeah,
so old.
that's not good.
Not good. And they're like, they were desperate, so they reached out and it ended up being a great experience, but they wouldn't have known that
Yeah.
from the initial view of the website. So, making sure that we, address that in a timely manner is
Yeah.
also important.
All right, I want to throw you a curveball.
Okay.
And this gets into the conversion. The site's not converting, and so you look at it, and the link's there, but just nobody's buying something. How do you get into, or where do we say, your offering is too big. Your conversion is, do you want to buy the yacht? Yes or no? And well, people aren't going to buy a yacht online. And so
Yeah.
how do you know that if your conversion is, put your credit card in here to place your yacht order today, that there's that's just not right. It's wrong on so
Yeah.
many dimensions, but they're not getting it and they're frustrated because they're not selling any yachts. How
Mhm.
do you how do you find that, and what do we tell customers?
Yeah, I think it's all about understanding where your website fits into that larger sales cycle and that what we call customer journey.
Yeah.
So, for something like that, it's a pretty major purchase. Most likely, your website is serving sort of that informational side of things. They're learning about who you are. They maybe aren't going to purchase. Maybe they've got more conversations to do offline. But for us, then we'd look at what those action are on the site and say maybe it shouldn't be purchase here. Maybe it should be talk to someone. Maybe it should be contact us with questions. Maybe we want to see how else we can frame the content of the site to better answer those questions and make them feel more confident that they do want to reach out and take that next step.
Yeah.
So I think it's a matter of understanding where that website fits into your larger business plan
Sure.
and making sure that the content and the way it's set up is fits in with those goals.
This customer journey you mentioned is people on a journey to engage with your product or service. I
Yeah.
assume they start out with discovery and learning. Again, they think there's a problem, and we're talking about not the problem with the website not converting, but it's like
Yeah.
identifying where the customer is coming in, and what mindset are they at. And so, do you recommend different content for different stages of the journey? And then maybe just talk about that. Talk about that briefly.
Yeah, I think it's understanding where during that journey that the website becomes useful, and it might be in multiple different places. We often many years ago would talk about this as like a sales funnel where it
Yeah.
was kind of step to step to step to step until they finally make a purchase.
Yeah.
Things are not that way anymore. I like to call it, instead of a funnel, it's a tornado. People kind of start off with discovery, they jump deeper, they go back out, and they kind of jump all around in that process. And sometimes your website is meeting them at multiple points based on where they are in that journey. So part of that comes down to user research. We can ask people who have purchased from you where they use the website, how the website was helpful in them going from, a novice to a customer.
Sure.
Otherwise, just doing additional research and things like that. And then making sure we have that content to fit those needs. So maybe it's a matter of we've got high level content on there about what this product does as a whole, but then we've also got more technical articles that answer some of the more detailed questions someone might have if they're farther along in that process.
Yeah.
And making sure that the calls to action on those pages align with where that user might be. Maybe the broader content is just a sort of general contact us where someone could send in a question. And maybe the more detailed content is let's talk to a salesperson and actually, have a more in-depth conversation about that,
Okay.
just as an example. So yeah, it's all about understanding what users are looking for on your site and making sure that you've got the content to meet them where they're at.
All right. So, do I have to do a redesign if I hire you, Caitlin? Does this mean I'm destined for a redesign of my website?
Not necessarily. We've seen a lot of success in, making little tweaks instead of larger ones. It really depends on what those problems are. So, going back to that navigation, for example, option, if your whole navigation, people can't find anything, your navigation's complicated, well, that might be a sign that we need to take a step back and we maybe need to look at a larger redesign. Same thing if your whole design is outdated, well, that probably means we need to build a new website. If we go to the data and we say, oh, it's just this page, and it's just that people aren't scrolling far enough down on this page, or they aren't seeing this button, well, let's not break the whole site. Let's not start from scratch on the whole site. The whole site is working. It's just this page that's a problem. So
Sure.
let's try a new button style. Let's change the color of the button. Let's move the content around, and let's get some new data to see how that impacts it.
Okay.
So not everything has to be a massive overhaul, but that's why you need the data to understand what the actual problem is and how we can fix it.
So we have a problem identifying the problem. Is there a problem being able to put some analytics and data on there and seeing heat maps and analytics if there indeed is a problem, especially if you have historical data over time. And if not, maybe it's time to just start plugging some of the stuff in and collecting data for the next month or two. That's a pretty low effort engagement to just begin. Let's start the process of let's get some x-rays of the patient here and take a look, and then we'll get back to you in a week and see if there's something we can do. Step number one. Number two, talking to users and talking to leadership, talking to the internal staff, but most importantly, users and getting their perspective on what are they looking for, identifying it. I imagine there's a little in between step 2 and 3. There's a intuition, which is the Caitlin and the team here at Northwoods. We have a sense of what works and what doesn't work too. How much of your intuition are you applying to all of these metrics?
We've seen a lot. So I think typically I can usually go into a site and say either from best practices standpoint or from I've seen similar problems in the past. We deal with a lot of websites, and myself in particular, I've been doing this for almost 10 years now from various scale of things. So we've seen a lot. But I will say what's always interesting about things like this is that the data sometimes tells a different story. And that's
Mm,
why we always have to go back to that data. I like to say that best practices are a great place to start, but all rules are meant to be broken in user experience. So if start with the best practices, start with kind of that intuition. But if the data is saying something else and your users are fine with this or not fine with that, even if best practice says to do something else, go back to your data, go back to what your users actually need, and just make sure your site works for them as well.
okay. All right. So what other things have I not asked you about on how to fix a website?
I think really the biggest thing I can recommend is just making sure you keep an eye on this over time. I think where UX can fall apart the fastest is
UX, what's UX? What is UX?
fair enough, a user experience.
User
Where the
experience.
user experience of a website falls apart the fastest is over time. I think it actually usually isn't a one day the site's great and then tomorrow it's not working.
Yeah.
It's usually a incrementally things are not starting to not work until finally it's just not a useful site for you anymore.
Yep.
So the more work you can do to keep an eye on your data over time, know what your goals are, make sure that things are still being achieved, and fix problems sooner rather than later, I think the more successful you're going to be in the long run at maintaining the performance of your website.
And with that, that's a great summary, and we'll leave it right there. So thank you very much for joining me for On the Campfire today, and I hope this is useful to everybody. And if you like it, give us 2 big thumbs up. Isn't that what you're supposed to say? Smash that like button, and leave a comment below. I think those are. I think we're learning how to do all this from talking to users. Thanks, Caitlin, and we'll
Thanks.
talk to you soon. All right, bye bye.